It is quite an honor to be back here. Thank you for that kind introduction, Captain Janik. Thank you to First Lieutenant McCarthy for inviting me down here for this really important occasion. It's a proud day for you all who are sitting here in the front row, but also for your families. You have gone through some of the hardest training in the world, and you have succeeded. And you ought to be proud and excited. And if you're like me, when I was sitting in those chairs 22 years ago, it was not the end, but an important milestone in achieving a life dream. I was following my passion, a passion that I had since I was about 11 years old. So, when I was a kid, and I grew up in Kentucky, I didn't come from a military family. And I just saw this History Channel documentary. And it had these really cool jets, F-14s at the time, landing on the back of an aircraft. And I basically said, that is cool. I'm going to do that. And like any 11 or 12-year-old, well, back then, what did you do when you found something that you really wanted? You went to the library. And you looked up everything you possibly could. Now today, you just look on your phone. But I took out every single book that I could find on naval aviation. I memorized all of the aircraft carriers that we had by the age of 12, all of the different types of jets that we had. In that process, that research, I learned very, very quickly, there were no women doing these jobs on aircraft carriers. And I couldn't understand that. Look, this is a really cool job. Why are there no women doing this? And that's when I realized, well, as I pulled the string on it, there's a federal law prohibiting women from doing this job. Well, I didn't understand that. 11 years old, well, what's the law? Let's just go change the law. Let's go change it. And my mother had to sit me down at the kitchen table and basically say, hey, honey, you can't change the law, but you can advocate for change. So that's what I did. I became an advocate at that age. I wrote the local newspapers as a 12-year-old, please change the law. This was right around the time of the Persian Gulf War, the late 80s, early 90s. I wrote my member of Congress and my senators, asking them to change the law. I wrote every single member of the House and Senate Armed Services Committees a letter, asking them to change the law. I got a letter back from my own congressman, which was, somewhat condescending, that basically said, you're a girl, go do something else. But I didn't quit. And when I started to get letters back from all the members of Congress, who were the important ones of that committee, that would then, look at this policy, look at this law, some of them came back that were just like my member of Congress. Go do something else, or lots of other things you can do. This is not one of them. And I got several letters back that said, you know what? Our military exists to fight and win the nation's wars. And we should have the best people in those positions. That was a radical concept at the time. And you ought to be able to compete to get in that cockpit. And if you're good enough, you ought to be able to be given a shot. And that's all I ever wanted. And I got lucky, because at the age of 17, in 1992, we had this amazing thing in our country happen. It's called an election. And we had more women elected to Congress than ever before in history at that time. And we had a new president. And within 3 months of that new president's inauguration and the new Congress coming in, they had rescinded what was called the Combat Exclusion Law. And the president opened up not all jobs to women in the military, but many more. And so 24 years after Rosemary Mariner, who was the first woman to fly in the United States Navy, 24 years after she pinned on her wings, all of the jets, all of the aircraft were now open to women in the Navy and the Marine Corps. That was super important for the Marine Corps, because the Marine Corps didn't have a single aircraft open to women at that time. And I got lucky, because I was just graduating from high school. I had turned 18, and a month later I went to Annapolis, raise my right hand, as you all have done, and swore an oath to defend the Constitution of the United States. And all of the doors were open for me just at the right time. And so later on, when I was able to be the first one to do X, Y, and Z, was simply because I was in the right place at the right time. But one of the things I learned along the way, and one of the things I loved about that career, and I loved every minute of it, and you will too, is that I was following my passion in service to the country. That is an amazing, important thing. John Glenn, famous Marine Corps aviator, he did some other things later on, said that the most important thing, or the thing that made him tick, was serving something greater than himself. And that's what you're all doing in service to your country. And as I walk through here today in this amazing museum, you see so much history here. It's humbling, right? The service and sacrifice of men and women who have endured danger and new technologies, unproven technologies when they flew these things. They were supremely successful. And their names like Theodore Ellison and Alfred Cunningham and John Glenn and Alan Shepard, George H.W. Bush, Rosemary Mariner, Charlie Bolden. You're following in their footsteps. And what they did, and all that you see around, is such a long line and a wonderful legacy for our country. I would argue that the men and women that flew these aircraft and in the footsteps that you're following in today were part of the world that we live in today, was built by them. Because we've seen since World War II the longest relative time of peace in human history. And it was protected by those men and women that flew these machines, that wore the wings that you will put on today. The sea lanes, the world economy, the institutions that we have today, in which the world benefits. And it makes me think about aviation, leadership, and how did they do it? And what are the things that make you successful? And I look back on my career, and it was 24 years wearing the uniform, and I loved it. And I look back on what made me successful in a Marine Corps fighter squadron. What are the traits? What are the things? And it occurred to me that those same traits are the same ones that make you successful in any endeavor in life, whether it's business or public service or anything else. And I learned those traits right here in flight school and at TBS and out there in the fleet. And the first one is hard work. You've done it. You've got some more to do. You don't get anywhere just by leaping there. It's step by step by step. It's hard work. There's no substitute for it. And that's important because hard work leads to credibility, which is super important in your squadron. Are you somebody that's credible? Are you somebody that your peers want to fly with? Can they trust you? Credibility leads to trust. Are you somebody that your subordinates look up to? The people that work for you? Can they trust that you know what you're doing? That you have the credibility through hard work to be the expert in your aircraft for your mission? Are you somebody that can be trusted by your bosses, by your commanders, such that they want you in that cockpit? They want you to take on that job. Hard work leads to credibility, and credibility leads to trust. And that's the key. An important piece of that trust is a word that we don't talk about very much anymore, and that's honor. It's being honest with yourself. It's standing up and making sure that people know that you're going to take responsibility for something that happens. If the mission didn't go so well, why didn't it go so well? Take responsibility. That honesty. That's so important to trust. The best leaders I ever found were the ones that had that. That ability to take responsibility. And the third trait is the one that I also feel that the very best leaders that I've ever come in contact with, whether it is outside the military or in a fighter squadron, it's a trait that they work consistently to try to develop. And that's courage. Do you dare? How does one get the courage to stand up in front of 50 old, crusty Marine Corps fighter pilots to debrief a 20-plane exercise at the end of Marine Corps version of Top Gun in Yuma, Arizona? Are you born with it? How do you get the courage to fly into combat? Or to go on national TV, or to run for political office? Whatever it is, how do you get it? You're not born with it. You develop it. And it's the most important trait. And it's something that you have to work on day after day after day. By doing the things you think you cannot do. That's what Eleanor Roosevelt once said. Doing the hard things. Volunteering for the tougher missions. And it starts at a young age, right? For me it did. It was, wow, I don't think I can run 3 miles. Go do it. And then it's TBS. And then it's something in flight school. Whatever you think you can't do, it's making sure that you tackle it and do it. You have to have the courage to act. The courage to be the one in the cockpit at night when it's really, really dark. The courage to not shrink away in silence when everybody else is doing that, but to stand up. As Teddy Roosevelt once said, it's very few people that actually have the courage to do what you're doing, to be the one in the arena. Because it's hard. And a lot of people fear criticism. And they fear the hard things because it's uncomfortable, right? There are those that want to do things, but they don't have the courage to do it because they're in fear of failing, even. And those people can live nice, easy lives in a nice, warm, cushy place of never being criticized and never standing up and never doing the hard things. But my challenge to you is don't live in that nice, cushy place. Because that's not what our country needs. The men and women whose exploits are talked about in this museum, who built our country and defended it, they didn't live in that nice, cushy place. They did the hard things. And they developed their courage day after day after day after day. They lived it. They lived their courage. That's what I ask you to do. And I'll just tell you a quick sea story as to where it all came together for me. All of those things. And when people say to me, what is the keys to success? All of those things. Honor, trust, credibility, hard work, and courage came together. For me, it was in combat, 2003, my second tour in Iraq. About 4 days into the war, Marines were pushing up north from Kuwait up into Baghdad. We weren't quite halfway to Baghdad at this point. It was a unit that was bogged down in a place called Al-Nazariya. We didn't know it. I launched on a standard mission. We were supposed to fly up north to a pre-planned target up there. We got up to our pre-planned target, and right as we were about ready to execute, we got a call from the ground controllers in the airspace and said there was troops to contact in Al-Nazariya. Can you get there? We did some quick calculations. You know what that's like. And we determined, yeah, we could get there, but we don't have much gas left. Let's give it a shot. So we fly over, it's a flight of 2 F-18s, pilot and Wizzo, both F-18 Deltas. We had two 2,000-pound JDAMs, so GPS-guided bombs, on each aircraft. We get over to Al Nazariya, we talk to the forward air controller on the ground. He has to get off the radio several times because he's getting shot at. His Marines are really in dire straits. They weren't prepared for this onslaught of the Iraqi Republican Guard. And we probably had, 7 or 8 minutes before we ran out of gas to do this thing. And as you will learn with close air support later on, you gotta know, it's really hard to know where the friendlies are sometimes, and you gotta know where they are, because you don't want to drop ordnance on your own people. So we took a couple minutes to figure out the lay of the land, and my lead pilot, I was in the Dash 2, so the second aircraft, as the Dash 2 Wizzo. Pretty junior at this time. But my lead pilot was the XO. He was the executive officer, so he knows what he's doing, right? Because he's a lieutenant colonel, right? The older ones always know what they're doing? Yeah. So he drops his bomb, we get it cleared hot, he drops his bomb, the forward air controller comes up 30 seconds later and says, well, the bomb hit off the side of the building. They were taking enemy fire from the building, so we were going to get rid of the building. Bomb drops off the side of the building, hits off the side, and doesn't explode. And the forward air controller says, that's great, but it didn't blow up, we're still getting shot. So the lead pilot comes around again with the lead Wizzo, and they could not get their systems together. They had some malfunctions. That will also happen in your career. Things won't go, the aircraft won't maybe cooperate for you. So he kicked it over to us. He had the immediate trust to kick it over to us, that we knew what we were doing, that we had the target, that we were ready to go. We had about 20 seconds to get it all ready. My pilot's call sign was Mongo. He was even more junior than me. And we came in for that run, and my heart was about this far out of my chest. But I knew it. I knew we were ready. Mongo had the trust that I was going to do everything to get that bomb ready, to find the target, to make sure the coordinates were in there, to make sure that it was far enough away from friendlies. All he was doing was flying that plane, getting us in position to drop that thing. Mongo hits the button after I tell him it's all good to go. We get it cleared hot. 30-second time to fall. I see on our screen, on our forward-looking infrared system that we have, the bomb blow up. I see the building's gone. But I don't hear anything from the FAC. So now I'm getting worried. The forward air controller comes back up after about 10 seconds, the longest 10 seconds of my life, and says, that was a shack. And I bring you that story because it encompasses all of those traits that I said will make you successful, not only in the cockpit, but whatever it is that you do in life. The hard work to get us there took years, as it has for you, okay? The credibility that we had, that the skipper of our squadron put us in that cockpit on that day, the trust that we had, the trust that I had with the forward air controller, who, by the way, was a Wizzo, a backseater, an F-18 guy, who was unfortunately stuck with the ground guys for the war. I'm kidding. But the trust that he had, that we were going to put the bomb exactly where he wanted it, because the friendlies were about 500 meters away. That's really close, called danger close. And the trust that Mongo and I had with each other. The credibility that the lieutenant colonel had that we could take over immediately. All of those things are built over time. And finally, the courage to execute. And that courage wasn't just a one-off. It's something you build over and over and over and over again to get to that point. You all have come so far. You've been shaped here in the cradle of naval aviation. You completed the best training in the world by the best instructors and the best commanders that the Navy has. You're part of a long legacy of just incredible Americans who have served our country. And you know that our nation's future is uncertain. It is as uncertain today in 2021 as it was when I was sitting in your shoes in 1999. I had no idea when I was sitting in that seat in 1999 that less than 2 years later, I would be sitting in the back seat of an F-18 Delta at the end of runway 24 left at Miramar Marine Corps Air Station on the morning of the 11th of September 2001 with 6 live air-to-air missiles loaded up on my jet, with my radar system ready to go to potentially launch and shoot down an airline. I had no idea that was in store for me when I sat in your shoes. The threats today are real to our nation. We still have them. We have known threats around the world, some unknown, but we have North Korea, as you know, China, the rise of China in a more aggressive state, and particularly in the South China Sea. The broader Middle East is a hotbed of instability 20 years ago. It still is. Russia is being more aggressive, particularly in those gray zones that could escalate very quickly into something much worse than just a cyber attack. Your job is to be on the tip of the spear for this country, to deter those threats, to be ready if and when the nation calls. That's your job. To make sure that the people out there on those beaches that are having fun, and my kids, are protected. That's your job. I did it 20 years ago, and I loved it because it was serving this country, and it was important. And you're going to do the same. I have no doubt. I have all the confidence in the world that when the nation calls, you will be ready. I just want to say from the bottom of my heart, congratulations to my fellow naval flight officers, fellow warriors. You've accomplished so much. Our country needs you. Live your courage. Semper Fidelis.